Hello. The history of tabletop gaming, and Games Workshop in particular, is full of countless incredible moments, and the contributions of an impossibly large number of awesomely talented individuals. Sometimes it can be hard to work out exactly what everyone did, what every contribution was, and how different people have influenced that history. But today's guest could not be simpler to understand, because I'm speaking to one of the co-founders of Games Workshop. John Peake was a schoolmate and later flatmate of Steve Jackson and Sir Ian Livingstone, and after a surprisingly winding road and career path, the three would come to the decision that they should start a tabletop gaming company, a company that John would name Games Workshop. We talk about the early days of getting to know Steve and Ian, the path that led to the creation of Games Workshop, and how John came to be crafting wooden games like Go and Backgammon, and then the series of events that would lead to the first Games Day, and ultimately John's decision to leave the company he helped create behind. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with Games Workshop co-founder John Peake. John, thank you so much for joining me. It's great to have you here.
It's a great pleasure to be with you, Jordan. It's been a long time coming, but I'm really looking forward to it.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, I guess the best place to start would really be your time at school. So I believe you met Steve Jackson, Ian Livingstone back in the school days. Is that right?
Absolutely, it is. We're going back to 1962 when I started at Altrincham Grammar School.
Right.
You probably weren't even born. And I went into 1C, and Steve was noticeable because he arrived late. He came in the start of the second term.
Right.
He had bright ginger hair, horn-rimmed glasses, and he stood out for that reason. We went into the second year into the same class, and in fact, we stayed in the same class throughout Altrincham Grammar School.
Hmm.
Got quite pally with Steve, although I did a lot of sport and he didn't. So we didn't see an awful lot of each other, but we were pals in the sixth form. We used to be partners in chemistry, mess about a bit. Ian, I didn't speak to at school once,
Right.
not once. He was in the year above, and then that was a lot of distance. But we used most of us seemed to keep to our own year group.
Sure.
And although I was aware of Ian, we never spoke.
Right.
I think Ian and Steve got together in the sixth form or towards the end of that time, but I wasn't aware of that at the time.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
So that's the school part of it, really. I suppose the next thing I'd say is that I didn't meet up with Ian until 1972. That's having finished at Nottingham University,
Right.
where I went to do engineering, civil engineering, and Steve had gone to Kiel
Hmm.
to do a biology course. Um, Ian went to Stockport College to do marketing, but
Right.
I only found that out later, again, around about 1972, so 3 years after leaving school. That's the
Sure.
first time I spoke to Livingstone, and that was in a local pub in probably in the Stamford, in which you may remember. But yeah, that was those are the days.
Yeah.
I mention that Steve came from Canada.
Right.
That was the other thing that that's why he was late joining the school. By the way, his parents had been working in Canada and they'd come back.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
There you go.
And so you were were you good friends with Steve? I mean, you were saying you spent a bit of time with him, you were lab partners and all that sort of stuff. Did you hang out outside of school and sort of play games and do all that sort of stuff?
I wasn't really into games, Jordan, very much.
Right.
Steve was from early on, but he was into guitar as well. And uh, we must have played. He was well keen on something called Risk, I think.
Right.
And he used to make. He made his own board. He was really into games, and it just wasn't something that really interested me, I'm
Mm.
afraid. And
Sure.
that was in the early days as well.
Mm. Yeah. And then did you keep in touch with Steve through university as well then?
No, not really.
No.
Once or twice, or once or twice, probably only that.
Mm.
We'd bump into each other in the local pub in Altrincham when we'd trips back home. Him from Kiel, me from Notting, when we sort of coincided, but we weren't in contact.
Sure.
It was just, oh, hi, how you doing, Steve? And, you know, as you would with your pals.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it wasn't a close relationship, but, a
Sure.
good acquaintance.
Yeah. And then so you've left university. Now you're in the Stanford. You're meeting Ian Livingstone for the first time. I mean, what was the sort of nature of those kind of early conversations? Was that just catching up and finding friendship?
It was. I mean, it was Steve that introduced me to Ian. I'm pretty sure of that. Again, as I've said several times, in the Stanford, I think it was.
Hmm.
Um, I'd known of Ian for 6 or 7 years when he'd been at school, but we'd never spoken. Um, I'd just come back from working in the States for the summer. I'd worked in Manhattan.
Right.
We're now talking probably August 74.
Hmm.
I've just come back from the States and I'm about to go down to London to start a job. My first real job, I suppose. And we got chatting, and I can't remember much about the conversation at all, but that's really when things we started to communicate. And so I went down to London.
Hmm.
I can't remember what Steve did. Ian was working in Altrincham. He was living with his mum and dad, and he was working for VIP, which is a petrol company,
Right.
and probably doing his marketing. And then, I mean, I came up and visited parents, and we connected, and I got in touch with Ian, and we started to establish a bit of friendship. And then he'd come down and visit me in London.
Right.
I'm in a flat in London. Then I've moved to another flat in London, and then another flat. You know the way it goes.
Hmm.
And just trying to think, the firm he worked for was called. Did I mention was called Linotype? They're the big printing company,
Right.
and I think he got a marketing job with them.
Hmm.
But as I said, he visited me on several occasions in various flats, and um, we got a bit more of a rapport going at that time. I can't really remember what Steve was doing or the order. Steve worked for a scientific laboratory equipment type firm. I'm just trying to think of the name of it now. It might come to me.
Sure.
Um, he also worked at Oxford University as a lab assistant. And at another point, probably a bit later on, he worked as a bird warden on Chesil Bank
Right.
in off Dorset. I don't think he's mentioned all these things. So here you go. These are all facets of Steve's early career. He
Hmm.
didn't really he didn't go into a biology job from Kiel, as far as I know. Whereas Ian went into marketing and I went into engineering. You see
Mm,
what I mean? Steve was a bit didn't quite know what was
sure.
going on with Steve in those early days.
Yeah.
Um, what was the question?
Well, I'm curious then. How did you all come to be sort of living together at one point in the flat in London?
What happened was I'd got a job on the Fleet Line, and the Fleet Line was renamed the Jubilee Line, the Underground Railway.
Okay.
I was on the construction of that, and I spent 12 months in London. The first 12 months um, doing engineering work on that project.
Right.
Ian had come down and visit me. He came 2 or 3 or 4 times, maybe during the year, on work assignments and what have you.
Mm,
After 12 months, with the measly pay I was getting as a young engineer, I jacked and got a better job. And that job meant I could live at home. And I went back to Timperley, Altrincham, Cheshire,
right.
which is where Ian lived
Mm,
with his folks. And I got a job. I had 2 jobs, and we're talking August 73
mm,
to about April 74. And so I saw a fair bit of Ian at that time.
mm.
And come April 74, I decided to pack in my jobs up in Altrincham and go back down to London.
Mm.
So that's what I did. And Ian decided to do the same. He decided to come with me. By this time, he'd moved out of his folks' place and was living in, I think it was Stamford Road, a flat in Stamford Road.
Right.
And so we came down to London together in April 74. We dossed on people's floors and camp beds for the month or two until we found a place. Uh, and Ian found this place in Olympia, and we stayed there for a few months.
Mm,
Steve wasn't on the Steve. I think Steve was actually doing his bird warden job by this time,
right.
and we were sharing the flat in Olympia with a couple of other people. That was fine, but we decided we wanted to try and find a better place for ourselves. And it was Ian that found Bolingbroke Road, the the place that we moved to.
Right.
Started renting in August 1974.
Right.
And Steve decided he was going to pack his bird watching job up and come up. And he joined us. And so that's really when we all established ourselves in Bolingbroke Road, 15 Bolingbroke Road, West 14.
Right.
I'd I got a job with on the construction of the Home Office, a temporary job, before starting an office job in engineering in about September
Mm,
of 1974. Ian was now working for Conoco. That's an oil company,
okay.
and he was in the marketing department at Conoco. Steve was unemployed.
Right.
Um, I got Steve a job on the construction project I was working on, um, just a temporary job, and he made a balsa wood model of the 10th floor of what actually became the Home Office. It was a prestige job,
Right.
and he made a balsa wood model. He was employed for about 6 weeks doing this thing. It was right up his street,
Yeah.
and yes, what the model was to enable the engineers to figure out the best way of constructing the 10th floor, which was a really quite a difficult construction,
Mm,
and to have a model and be able to visualize the way it all was going to come together and put this bit in and then that bit and the whatever. And it was really, it was a useful exercise from that point of view.
right.
I wasn't working. I was working for a firm of engineers close by this time, and that was on a project in the Shetland Islands,
Mm,
which went on for a long time. It was all to do with the North Sea oil at
okay,
that time. So yeah, that was how we started at Bolingbroke
right.
and the first few months.
Yeah.
And what happened was, I'd gone to um, I'm going back a bit now. I'd gone to Greece with Ian in the summer of '74.
Mm,
Steve hadn't come with us, but we'd gone there and I'd noticed backgammon being played in the tavernas. Oh, we both did.
mm,
And it was becoming popular and trendy in the UK at that time. And I thought to myself, well, I could make boards like this and sell them and supplement my meager salary. And so I decided to try and to give this a go.
right.
And made things like this,
Amazing.
which is a backgammon board, as you can well
Yeah.
realize. And I sold them to guys at work
Right.
for a tenner a go, which was a lot of money in those days.
Sure.
And
Yeah. That's amazing. So is
made
that
them in my bedroom. I made them in my bedroom at
right?
Bolingbroke Road.
And just totally self-taught, just sort of learning as you went?
Absolutely.
Right.
I've got no. Some of us are good at a reasonable at DIY, and
Mm,
that's all I am. They've called me a craftsman, but I'm not at all. I just, you know, I've got attention to detail, and I can, stick bits of wood together, and was self-taught basically. But I just copied what I'd seen in Greece.
mm,
In fact, I bought a backgammon board from Greece back home and
mm.
copied it. Simple as that.
Right. Yeah. And they were
But
selling.
so, well, no,
No.
I've sold two of them.
Right. Okay.
On the strength of those two and a few more inquiries, I decided to buy enough wood for six
Mm,
and started doing, a few more. And this was all in the bedroom in the back bedroom of the flat at Bolingbroke Road.
mm.
Steve and Ian were, you know, not really involved at all. They were playing games and stuff, and we got together. We were good pals.
Mm.
But I was grafting away and producing lots of sawdust, and used to go to bed with um, the smell of contact adhesive
Mm.
and varnish. I'd be breathing this in, and there was
Yeah.
dust and wood shavings all over the place.
Right.
It becomes more relevant as we get to Christmas and go through Christmas of '74
Mm.
and into '75. And are you going to ask me about Games Workshop?
Sure. Well, yeah. So at this point, the three of you are living together, but doing very different jobs, and you've
Yes,
taken up
indeed.
this sort of, this side gig, this sort of extra hustle of creating your own, manufacturing your own self-taught wooden boards and game boards. How does that then move to, okay, let's start a gaming company together? Like, what were the steps that took you to that?
Yeah. Well, it was early January 75.
Right.
I think it was a Tuesday evening, and I've come back from work, and I'm going to be, or I've started doing my backgammon boards in the back bedroom, and Steve is there.
Mm.
Ian was out. Ian was at a Conoco do. And so we get, Steve and I are chatting away, and suddenly maybe we should start a games company. Steve's interested in me churning all this stuff out,
Mm.
and basically Steve being so knowledgeable about games, and Ian as well. They were both very keen on games. We thought it'd be a good idea. Why not? Let's give it a go. See what happens. We could do a mail order part of it. I could increase the range, not just sell backgammon, but other games.
Mm.
Um, we could do a fanzine, and let's just give it a go and see what happens.
Right.
And it was as simple as that, really. It just happened out of one casual meeting one evening
Mm.
in early January 75.
Right. And did you have was the name there from the very beginning, sort of the vision for the company?
Well, the name came up in that first meeting.
Right.
Steve said he got a couple of bits of paper and pencils. He said, "Look, let's think of each of us think of three names
Mm.
for this company." And so I can remember I remember this so clearly. We sat there and so, sort of thinking what to write down. And okay, let's have a look. What have you got? And I only had one name on my piece of paper,
Right.
which was Games Workshop,
Right.
whereas Steve had got Games Garage, I think, and Gamut of Games
Right.
on his. And well, as soon as Steve saw the word Games Workshop, he immediately thought, that's the name. We're going to go with that. It sounds good. And I'd chosen that because really the state of my bedroom,
Mm.
it was a mess with wood shavings and dust, and I did clean it up occasionally, but you can imagine. And also that the workshop gives you this thought of perhaps somewhere where new game ideas are explored and developed,
Mm.
and so it just came to me basically, and we decided we'd go with that name.
Amazing. Yeah.
And we wondered how Ian would take all this when he got home.
Right.
And he did come home later that evening, and we said we were all excited about this big business we were going to start up, and he wasn't interested.
Right. Wow.
Surprisingly, he was pretty lukewarm about the whole thing, really, and we just couldn't persuade him. And if our this great idea we got so excited about
Mm.
just didn't really do it for him.
Right.
And it took about 10 days for Ian to come around to it. But he did. And mainly due to Steve going on at him, cajoling him into, come on, let's give it a go. And as I say, he eventually he came around to it. In the meantime, Steve and I had gone to Hamleys that weekend
Mm.
and were sort of surreptitiously noting down the selling prices of all the popular board games that we could see.
Yeah.
But once Ian came on board, he immediately got to work and produced, because he was quite good at drawing, and he produced a logo for Owl. Well, what the fanzine. I don't know who came up with the term Owl and Weasel, but it
Mm,
wasn't me. It was Steve and or Ian. But that was going to be the name of the fanzine.
right,
And I say, Ian, he did the dog logo as well. Games Workshop has got this dog logo. He did all that
right,
early on.
sure. So the Owl and
So
Weasel
there was
was
no
all
great.
part of it, yeah.
Say that. Sorry again.
So I was just sort of thinking about the almost the idea at this point. Then, so you're checking out the price of different board games at Hamleys. You know that you can make a backgammon and potentially some other games, and you're going to do the fanzine. So is it? Are you thinking right? We're just going to do all board games. We're going to do all kinds of toys. Like, what was the it's the selling point that you were going to go for?
Well, I think it was an idea was mail order.
Right.
Yeah, we do. We buy games off manufacturers or suppliers, wholesalers, and sell them mail order.
Okay.
But really, that didn't take off. I can't remember much activity um, from Steve. It would have been Steve because we they spent most of their time writing Owl and Weasel
Right.
and did a great job of that, in my opinion.
Mm,
Um, but they were the creative ones. They were the ones that knew how to write about games,
mm,
and they did. Uh, as I say, the mail order thing really didn't ever take off, in my opinion.
mm,
It did when Dungeons and Dragons came along, but that was a good while longer. That was 6 or 7 months in
mm.
before we came across D&D. But it was really Owl and Weasel that occupied Steve and Ian mostly. My involvement uh, was very much just on the hands-on, the practicalities of getting it printed, taking it down to Prontoprint in Strutton Ground,
Right.
SW1 near to where I worked, getting the 50 or 100 copies done, bringing them back home, borrowing the stapler from work and the long reach stapler, and collating and putting all these Owl and Weasels, which you're well aware of.
Sure. Yeah.
I remember those. Um, Putting them together, but that's all I did.
Right.
It was their creativity which produced that.
Sure. Yeah. And you're still manufacturing games at this point, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. We early on, Ian got an order for something called Wari or Mancala. It goes up by several different names.
Mm,
It's the one you see on the that picture there. If people can see that,
right.
which is it's made out of African hardwood, and I was carving the. These are the tools, the gouges that I used to use to
They're the
gouge
real,
the.
the original
There,
ones. Yeah.
these are the ones. These are the
Amazing.
ones. But yeah, so there was War. He came on the stream, and we then discovered Go. It
Mm,
was within a month or two. Go was on the scene, and I made a few prototypes of that game.
right.
I'd become interested in it as well, and joined the London Go Centre. And we used to buy stones. The stones are the pieces. We used to buy them ready made from the London Go Centre and the
Right.
bowls, and we just did the board.
Right.
And there was also solitaire, which I think Ian bought 10 wooden breadboards or cheese boards or something, and we turned them into solitaire boards and sold them, and one or two other games as well.
Right.
But I mean, it was basically me doing all the woodwork and what have you,
Yeah.
and Steve and Ian doing the Owl and Weasel.
Right. And were they were selling, were they, the handmade games that you were making?
Yeah, they were. I well remember. Um, well, Ian got an order for six. I mean, it's not big numbers, but he got an order for six of the Worry boards
Mm.
early on, so he knocked those out. And then, as I say, Go. I made several prototypes of Go, and we decided on one particular one that worked. We then made a big decision to get 50 blanks made up because this thing is hollow.
Mm.
It's just a hollow box made from chipboard.
Okay.
And we decided rather than I make those, we'll get those made out, which we did for £3 a go. And we got 50 of them made. So that's 150. That was quite a big order and quite a big risk then.
Yeah.
And they were all over the place in the flat, stored in any available space. And slowly that number dwindled as I started putting veneer on them and
Mm.
doing the job to make them into go boards and putting the legs on and all that. That number slowly dwindled. And by the time I was finishing, I'd done about 36. I remember. I think maybe 30. I think there were 15 of these left
Mm.
when we decided to call it a draw.
Right.
But I'd already made three or four other prototypes, so that sort of number.
Right. Okay.
We sold them to Harrods.
Wow.
I remember Ian calling one time when he'd taken one of these Go board sets to Harrods, and he called me to say he'd just sold six to him at £39 a go,
Wow.
which they immediately doubled. They put them in a lovely um, or one in a glass display cabinet
Mm.
at Harrods, and put a £78 um, price tag on it, which was a lot of money in those days
Sure.
for
Yeah.
a game.
Yeah.
But we sold to John Lewis, Peter Jones, several of the Selfridges, I think, had several of the London stores.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, they gave six away um, as prizes
Right.
um, to a competition for some computer magazine. So
Right.
we made those six prizes there, and the six went to the Middle East somewhere. That
Yeah. Yeah. So there is
I
some
was
traction.
busy.
Yeah. Absolutely. And
I
then,
was busy.
it, so you mentioned before, about 6 months in was when Dungeons and Dragons kind of came onto the scene, right? So did that then? Did you start to see a divergence, like within the company, within what you guys were focusing on, and the attention, I suppose?
Yes, yes, really. D&D was a game changer. It turned out. Obviously, we all know that now. But back then, I, my memory is a bit different from Steve and Ian's, or Ian's at least. I seem to remember Steve coming back from either a games and puzzles testing panel or somewhere else
Hmm.
and raving about this new game he'd come across that evening. I don't think he'd played it. But he'd watched it being played,
Right.
and that was in about May or June or something of 75.
Hmm.
And he really, he thought this was a fantastic new idea in gameplay, role playing,
Hmm.
and indeed it was. To be honest, I was never really into games,
Hmm.
so it was only of peripheral interest to me. And this is where, as I think you've just mentioned, really, it started to move apart a bit, really, because the focus went on to D&D pretty early on.
Hmm.
And my memory is that Steve wrote to the publishers, which is TSR, in, I think it was Lake Geneva in the States,
Yeah.
um, asking about this game. And my memory is that I can remember being on the top floor at Bolingbroke Road with Steve and Ian when we were opening a letter from the States where they basically said, yes, you can be UK distributors, agents for us in the UK,
Hmm.
as long as you will agree to be European distributors as well.
Okay.
So we thought, okay, it was as simple as that,
Yeah.
really, and that's what changed everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have I moved off the subject a bit? But
No, absolutely, John. That makes sense. I mean, did you, just out of interest, did you try it at all? I know you weren't into games very much, but did you have a game at all?
I'm afraid I didn't. I
No.
saw it being played by Ian and Steve
Mm.
once or twice with others, but I didn't ever get involved myself.
Right.
I just didn't enthuse about it, I'm afraid.
Sure.
I can understand, you games playing guys, I know how into it you get, and that's fantastic. It's great. But it would just something didn't really appeal too much to me, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
I was into abstract games and I was into Go, and I'm
Mm.
afraid that was about as far as it went with me.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah. So
Well,
Steve and Ian, obviously, they got very into it, right? They were really loving it. Yeah. So how did that then start to
very
change
much so.
the company as well?
Sorry.
How did that start to change the company then?
Well, it did eventually.
Mm.
We had Games Day came up as an idea, and Games Day eventually settled on a date in December.
Mm.
And there's a lot of preparation and organization to do for that. And D&D became, we had to, it took us about till September to get an agreement with TSR and to actually receive some games into the UK. But they were small numbers initially. Um, but a lot of, if you look at the Owl and Weasel at that time, there is quite a lot of talk about D&D and
Mm.
discussion, and it's clearly becoming a big issue. And well, as Games Day got closer and closer, and D&D became uh, more talked about, and certainly was featured at during Games Day. Um, the, the 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 making of the wooden games was became less important at that time.
Mm.
The emphasis really became D&D.
Mm.
There were other games as well, but it was, by far and away, most of the interest from Steve and Ian was on Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
Understandably.
Were you seeing that in the sales figures as well? Were buyers, consumers moving towards that?
I suppose so, but I wasn't party to anything other than the sales of D&D didn't really take off until Games Day
Right.
in my book. We may have sold a few in the 2 or 3 months before that, but we certainly didn't. We didn't. I don't think we received an order from the States until September or October. So it
Okay.
was quite late on in that year when things started to, move upwards a bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so that's it, really. I think the Owl and Weasel was a print run of about 50 or 100. I think it went to 100,
Okay.
but it only used to sell for 10p or
Right.
15p. So it was a labor of love, really.
Mm.
It never really made much money, um, but it did get us games. The name Games Workshop and the presence of us in front of the games cognoscenti, if you see what I mean.
Right.
And that was probably a very useful thing to do.
Yeah.
Um, to be honest, I did some rough figures a while ago actually, and you know it was a tiny setup then. I reckon I sold about, or I made wooden games, Go, backgammon, Wary, a couple of others, Solitaire, and we got about 990, just under 1,000 quid's worth of income
Right.
profit from that
Yeah.
over 12 months. So it was not huge,
Right.
but in terms of income to workshop, it was by far and away the biggest element in that first year, really,
Yeah.
because as I say, D&D didn't really start to lift off until towards the end.
Right. So workshop wouldn't have been there to capitalize on D&D if not for that first year's worth of sort of handmade game sales.
That's right. That I do feel that's the case, and in fact, Ian has said that as well. In D&D, when they announced that I was leaving, he did make that point,
Mm.
and that's the way it was. But it got us through that first year,
Yeah.
and well, then the rest is history, really. In a way, I mean, D&D really did start to take off,
Of course.
but we got to the point in January 76 where Ian and I had to make decisions whether to give up our professional jobs
Mm.
and go full time or not. And it was an easy decision for both of us, I think, because I don't think Ian was particularly happy with Conoco and his marketing job, whereas I loved my engineering job
Right.
and I knew that games wouldn't work for me.
Yeah.
And Ian thought quite the reverse. So Ian and Steve got together and took Games Workshop forward, and I withdrew at that point.
Right. Yeah. So it was a purely, I mean, obviously you were sort of seeing the direction of travel, I guess, for Games Workshop and where it's likely to go based on
Yeah,
Steve and Ian's interests. And then just from your own career perspective, you're thinking, actually, I would rather go in this direction instead.
yeah, that's right. That's
Right.
it in a nutshell. That's it. I was by. It all happened on one evening, actually. Ian and Steve had been out, and they'd just at some games do. I can't remember what, but they came back late. I was grafting away in the back bedroom, churning out wooden games, and I don't know. It all got a bit heated.
Mm.
I'm not quite sure why, but I jacked on a whim. I was so tired
Mm.
and worn out churning these games out that I just thought I've had enough, and it ended like that. I'm afraid
Okay.
we kept on good terms, but it was there was no there was a board meeting or anything like that. It was a bit impulsive perhaps,
Right.
and but it was the sensible thing for both of us to do, really.
Mm.
I feel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I was curious about the. I mean, it feels like then the games day that happened just at the end of the previous year, just before you left, was almost the culmination of sort of your time with Games Workshop. Maybe. I mean, have you sort of? I mean, what are your memories from the event itself? Was it like a sort of celebration of Games Workshop up to that point, or how did it feel that?
yes, it was actually.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, I was involved a bit, helping with this, that, and the other, but it was basically Steve and Ian
Mm,
because they was had so much knowledge about games, and I didn't, so I couldn't really contribute much. I did a bit of running and fetching and that sort of thing. But games day was pretty successful, I think.
mm,
It got onto Radio 4,
right.
um, featured
Yeah.
um, on the. I think Nick Ross, who was went on to do bigger things actually, but Nick Ross came to interview Steve, I think, or Ian, and we were. It was all pretty exciting at the time, and a lot of people turned up to it as well.
Mm, yeah.
Uh, um, yeah.
Yeah. And then, I mean, I guess, obviously having seen that, having made this decision to move away from Games Workshop, to leave it in the hands of Steve and Ian, did you like how quickly did that happen? Did you just down tools that night and that was it? Or was there a transition period?
I can't remember
No,
actually.
sure.
I honestly can't remember. I think I wouldn't have down tools immediately there and then, but probably, you know, within not very long, I was looking it up.
Right.
I was tired, and I was actually um, needed in engineering. My job took me to Shetland, and I had to go up to go. I made umpteen flights up to Shetland back and forth at that time. So, I had my professional career drawing me away from workshop as well. There's one thing I would say. Ian did make some comment in Owl and Weasel about how I wanted to continue making wooden games and establish another nothing could be further from the truth.
Right.
I'm afraid I'd had enough by this time.
Right.
And anyway,
Sure.
so that was it. I mean, we continued, in the flat, but and I think it was later that year that Ian and Steve went off for a couple of months to meet Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson and the other guys that were integral parts of TSR.
Mm. What was that like to see that sort of continued? If you're still living together and sort of seeing them progress with Games Workshop and move into that space, was that? Were there any kind of emotions there, or what did that feel like?
Well, to be honest, I can't really remember. There wasn't any real animosity.
Mm,
I do remember regretting that I hadn't, although there was no limited company involved early on, it was just a partnership.
mm,
I wish there had been something that I could have taken a share of and just sat back and said to the guys, good luck. I hope it goes well for Games Workshop. Um, but something that I could have had a share of,
yeah.
if things had developed, which they did. But I didn't do anything like that.
Mm,
I just basically left with the tools that I'd used to make these games,
Mm.
and that was about it, really. But we got on well. We
Mm.
continued to get on pretty well, um, but they were busy, and things really started to move.
Yeah.
Although I don't remember receiving large numbers of D&D consignments to Bolingbroke Road. But by this time, although they hadn't got their shop at Dalling Road in Hammersmith yet,
Mm.
they probably had got a warehouse or somewhere that they could um, operate from.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think where it was now, northwest London, up the A4 somewhere.
Very well.
Anyway,
Yeah. I mean, what has it been like sort of watching it grow over the years and evolve and sort of change? I mean, obviously it's a massive success story and it's sort of and created a British industry essentially. I mean, it must be tough at times to sort of to see that and to know that you were there, but and not necessarily as
I don't
remembered as
regret.
part of
Yeah,
it.
I don't have regrets. A lot of people have asked me this. Do I
Mm.
have regrets? But I could never have built a career out of games. I just wasn't that interested.
Mm.
I wasn't. Simple as that.
Yeah.
So it's amazing what Games Workshop has become, isn't it? We all agree that.
Mm.
I have wondered because I think that when Ian and Steve finally decided to sell Games Workshop, I think it was early 90s or something like that,
Mm.
considerable time on. I think they'd sold it for 10 million quid or something. It was in the papers as being that sort of figure. I remember thinking, oh, I wouldn't have minded being around for that. But the question is, which was the bigger achievement? Is it taking it from nothing to 10 million,
Mm.
which is what Steve and Ian did, or taking it from 10 million to 3 billion,
Mm.
or whatever its market capitalization is at the moment? Because those guys have done incredibly well, haven't they?
Sure.
Absolutely. And changed the whole gaming scene.
Yeah.
It developed it to incredibly. Um,
Yeah, very much so.
so it's off to them. Well, hats off to Steve and Ian. I mean, I don't know whether they did this as part of Games Workshop, but then the fighting fantasy game books that they
Mm.
developed. I remember that those them developing those,
Mm.
and they did really well with those, in my opinion.
They did. Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean,
great
I
credit,
think it's
great credit.
fair to say, and I think it's worth crediting you as well, John. And yes, going from 10 million to 3 billion is an incredible feat. Going from nothing, well, not quite nothing, is it? But going from where they were to 10 million is an incredible feat. But going from literally nothing, zero to 1,000, that first year's turnover is just as impressive.
Well, thanks very much.
Well, thank you, John, for
Appreciate it.
being a key part of the creation of Games Workshop and taking those first steps with Steve and Ian to allow the history that came after it. But also thank you for joining me and for telling your story. I really appreciate it.
It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been a long time coming, but I really appreciate the opportunity, Jordan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I would like to extend my huge gratitude for John for joining me to chat about his perspective on such an important period in Games Workshop history. It was a really worthwhile conversation, and I really, really enjoyed it. So thank you so much, John. If you would like to support the work that I do here, investigating and reporting on the history of Games Workshop and the wider tabletop industry, and seeking out and conversing with the people who have contributed to and created all of these games that we love, then please consider checking out my Patreon via the link in the description below. It is also enormously helpful if you can like, comment, subscribe, share, and review this interview on YouTube and in podcast feeds, where you can also get access to In Conversation with Jordan Sorcery, the GW Films Club, and the GW Books Club as well. Everything you can do to help spread the word of Jordan Sorcery and my work is really, really important, and I'm very grateful for it. Thank you once again to John. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.